Hello everyone. One of the most common phobias on our planet is the fear of being buried alive, or taphophobia. Thank you Kill Bill and Buried for our nightmares, although Uma Thurman was able to get out of that coffin, breaking it with just a couple of punches. But is it possible to do it in real life? Let's figure it out. So, what would happen if you are buried alive? Let's get it on.
The games have just begun.
So imagine that you woke up in a dark enclosed space. You can't sit or move, and after a few seconds you realize that you are in a coffin. Yes, you're in a coffin, but still alive, which means that you can save yourself if you act quickly and strictly follow these instructions. So first of all, don't panic. We know it's hard to do it when you're actually in a grave, for crying out loud, but the calmer you are, the more chances you have for salvation. The fact is that there's not a lot of oxygen underground. In a regular coffin or box of the same size, there's enough oxygen for an adult person to survive for about 40 minutes. If you're scared, you breathe more heavily, and the oxygen won't last that long. With all of your strength, try to calm down and clear your head. You meditate? Well, great, it's time to do it. If you have a smartphone, try to call someone close. Most likely there'll be no signal under the ground, but you can try. If you can't connect with people on the surface, use the phone to light up the space around you. No phone? Then touch the walls. It's important to understand what exactly your coffin is made of. Most likely it's made from wood, and if the lid didn't break under the weight of the earth, then it is quite strong. On the one hand, that's good, because the earth could have just crushed you, and on the other, well, you'll really have to try hard to get out. So do you have a lighter or a match in your pocket? Well, lighting a fire in a coffin's a pretty bad idea because an open flame will absorb your precious oxygen, so don't use them more than once, and only if it's absolutely necessary. Act quickly. The coffin was buried very recently and the ground above should still be soft, best if it turns out to be dry. Moisture and clay increase the pressure on the lid, and it would be much harder to get through it. Most likely there are about 2 meters of soil above you, which would enter the coffin once the lid is a little damaged. Therefore, it's necessary to think about protection in advance. Cross your arms over your chest and pull off your shirt, turning it inside out, but don't remove it completely. It is important that your head turns out to be in a kind of cloth bag, so tie up your shirt at the top. Don't think about the fact that it looks ridiculous though. Such a cloth bag will protect you from inhaling dust and increase your chances of survival. If the lid of the coffin is still whole, you have to break it, but don't do it with your hand like the Black Mamba. Even if you are a trained fighter with great skills, it's very hard to hit hard enough to make a hole in the coffin when you're lying down. Use your feet and try to hit the lid in the middle. Once the soil begins to fill the coffin, use your hands and feet to try and ram it in such a way that you don't lose the ability to move. Fighting for your life in such conditions is a difficult task. Almost impossible, but you still have a chance. Once there's enough soil in the coffer to tamper, try to push it with your feet and little by little lift the lid on the side of your head. It will require a lot of strength and incredible perseverance, but hey, your life literally depends on it. If you're lucky and the depth of the grave is less than 2 meters, then after some heroic moves, your head should end up above the ground, which means that you'll get the long-awaited access to oxygen. Your body is still covered in dirt, but the worst is behind you. You can rest a little and then start pulling yourself from under the ground. Have you seen how worms wriggle? Well, move in the same way and don't dare give up. If possible, call for help and make as much noise as possible. Many people rescued from the graves were helped by random passers-by who dragged them to the surface. Well, if the coffin is more than 2 meters underground, then the chances of getting out are not great. The amount of land on the lid may be too much, and after moving part of it to the inside of the coffin, you'll hardly have enough space to move. In addition, it's necessary to take into account the weight of the soil. However, this doesn't mean that it's not worth trying. There is really nothing to lose, so why not take a chance? You must have noticed that we've talked about a 2-meter depth being good enough for you, but why exactly 2 meters and not 1.5 or, for example, 4? It's all about the standard that exists in every country, which in turn derived from a rather old tradition. It originated in 1655, when all of England was devastated by the bubonic plague. In these terrible years, people feared the spread of infection, and the mayor of London issued a special decree, according to which all the dead had to be buried at a depth of 2 meters. This was to help prevent the spread of the terrible disease. The times of the plague, though, have long since passed, but the standard has survived to this day. However, in the US, it can vary from state to state, and the difference is about 45 centimeters. Burying coffins closer to the surface is impossible. They can be dug by 2 curious wild animals, but burying people deeper can cause problems too. For example, in New Orleans, there are many underwater currents. Moreover, there were cases when coffins buried too deep were kind of pushed out from the underground, although it happened many years after they were buried. Therefore, if you are buried alive, don't count on it. There is also one more reason for this exact depth, but it works for countries with a more severe climate and really cold winters. The Earth under such conditions freezes just to a depth of 2 meters. Above this level, the water in the soil freezes in winter and melts in the summer, so it expands and contracts. So accordingly, it stirs and reels all that is at a shallow depth, including coffins. And although the people in them don't really care, tradition is tradition. Well, so you feel a little uneasy and you're about to get a new phobia. But don't worry, because you aren't alone. Taphophobia is considered one of the basic fears of the human psyche. Testimonies of taphophobia can be found all throughout history, all because of the fact that a person who's unconscious or in a so-called lethargic sleep is really easy to mistake for a deceased person. For example, in 1344, the Italian poet Francesco Petrarca slipped into a lethargy and was considered dead and laid like this for as long as 20 hours. In accordance with the Italian laws at the time, he was supposed to be buried within 24 hours after his death, but then Francesco suddenly woke up, shocking everyone. After this incident, Petrarch lived for another 30 years. Of course, the authorities, as far as they could, tried to deal with these erroneous funerals. In 1772, a German duke imposed a mandatory postponement of the funeral until the 3rd day to prevent the possible burial of a living person, and soon this rule was adopted in other European countries. However, it was not always strictly followed. During mass epidemics, the victims of dangerous diseases were buried as soon as possible, fearing that the infection would spread further. Of course, with this approach, there was a chance to accidentally bury a person who was not dead. And by the middle of the 19th century, the fear of being buried alive became an officially recognized phobia. Sometimes this was really crazy. A rich inhabitant of Manchester, Hannah Beswick, thanks to her phobia, turned into a real legend. After her brother was buried alive by mistake, the woman began to fear it so much that she made a very strange testament. In 1758, Hannah Beswick died. However, she was not buried, but in accordance with her will, embalmed and kept without being buried for more than 100 years, and checked for signs of life from time to time. For several decades, the mummy of Hannah Beswick was even an exhibit at the Museum of the Manchester Natural History Society, and only in 1868, after deciding that the woman was irrevocably and unmistakably dead, her body was finally buried. To somehow calm the most sensitive people, these so-called safe coffins were invented. They allow people buried prematurely to give out a sign if they're alive, or even to save themselves. Most of these coffins were equipped with a small pipe that emerged on the surface and had a small bell on top. There was a rope or light chain connecting the bell and the leg or hand of the buried person through the pipe, so they would wake up in the coffin and call and somebody would save them. Pretty convenient. The inventors even came up with special protection systems against accidental ringing, and some safe coffins were even equipped with small windows so that the watchman at the cemetery could look and see if the deceased was, well, deceased, and if everything was in order there. By the way, although modern medicine can fairly accurately determine whether a person has died or not yet, safe coffins exist even now. For example, in 1995, the Italian inventor Fabrizio Caselli invented and patented a modern analog. His project included an alarm activated from the coffin, a communication system like a door phone, a portable flashlight, a breathing apparatus, a cardiac monitor, and a pacemaker. maker. Perhaps today you can find more advanced versions of safety coffins, for example with Wi-Fi or a touchscreen. Who knows? By the way, in the famous show The Mythbusters, one day they checked whether it was possible to get out of a coffin using the method from the movie Kill Bill. Alas, the results were disappointing. A special robot that kicked the coffin lid from within couldn't make a hole in it after 600 strong strokes. But even assuming that it could do it, the Mythbusters didn't succeed. They managed to get out only from under a 60cm thick layer of soil. 2 meter thick soil would fill the coffin in just a few seconds. Psst, dude, are you looking for new technologies and great gadgets? Are your thoughts focused on the future? Do you love huge vehicles and can't imagine your life without robots around you? Then visit TechZone and you'll find all this and more. The link is in the description. You interested? Great.